what was I going to get the other day? Oh, melatonin. I was going to get melatonin pills, and I had to double check because I had wheat in it.
Huh.
For a pill.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. There's worse things.
Brian, how's it going?
Going good, man. How are you?
Going well. Are you having a good lockdown?
I mean, as good as we can. I mean, what we were allowed to do. I'm in Philadelphia, and we're still kind of like on this indefinite shutdown, despite our mayor breaking his own rules. But, I mean, I guess we're making it work for what we can.
Let's pick on the mayor of Philadelphia just for a second.
So easy. Yeah, he went to Baltimore, violating his own non-dining in orders because the rules in Baltimore were laxer. So... Yeah. It's almost like some of the what's the old Animal Farm quote? Some animals are more equal than others.
Yeah. So is it and I ask this a lot, but is it a let them eat cake kind of thing where our overlords feel that as long as they lock the rest of us down, it's safe enough? But I used to think that that's what it was. It was just like arrogance. Well, I'm too essential to follow these rules, but I'm starting to be convinced that they don't actually believe that their own lockdowns work.
No.
Because why would you risk your own family like that?
Yeah, I think it's more so to create this persona of like, we're in control. And I think we're seeing this more and more as the lockdown goes on. It's a really a difference between the folks who believe that we can kind of make this work without the government telling you who's essential and who's not. And then those who are trying to create this sense of control to maybe make people feel a little more... they have some sense of idea of what's coming, but then to your point, right? We see they don't actually believe this stuff,
yeah.
and it's quite obvious. I mean, we see it with Governor Newsom violating his rules in California, Whitmer with her family, going to their vacation homes.
Well, if you spend over $400 a plate, it's different. Like
COVID forgets.
Yeah, COVID doesn't.
It's like after 9 p.m. in the bars in New York. Yeah. They don't know that you're going to be there. I mean, or no, actually it does know that you're going to be there. Or unless you order chicken wings, in which case... Oh, wait, no, chicken wings don't count from Mayor Cuomo, or Governor Cuomo, right? What is it? You have to order like an actual meal in order for COVID to avoid?
I had to buy a bag of chips in the Dallas airport because they were COVID-preventing chips.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
It's funny because, I was saying beforehand, my wife and I, we live in Philadelphia, but, you just go over... one road into a different zip code, and all of a sudden COVID doesn't impact indoor dining. It's amazing how that works.
Yeah.
Wild.
But let's take a step back. I don't want to go down the COVID thing because people that watch this show are probably tired of me just
honestly, I can't blame it. It's
it.
Every day, right?
Yeah.
Like COVID, it's in our mainstream like nonstop.
But one of the upsides of political stupidity for us at Free the People, and I was having this conversation with Eric July down at the Blaze TV studio, is like once you sort of get stuck in this lockdown thing, it forces you to innovate because in his case, he was going to take his band on the road, which is how he made his living.
Right.
In our case, like we do lots of public speaking and lots of events and that kind of thing, and in a strange way, the being forced to change your plans sparks new innovation. And there's a metaphor for what the government should have done with COVID. Like if we actually needed new innovation, perhaps we could have done it from the bottom up.
Yep.
But how about you? Like you just give everybody a little bit of background about your podcast and We Are Libertarians and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm part of the We Are Libertarians network, which was started by Chris Spangle back in 2012.
How'd you come up with the name for your show?
The Brian Nichols Show? How about that? I know it's very creative. But actually, really one of the things in my sales experience is you try to create some branding, right? So looking at the We Are Libertarians network and yours truly here at the Brian Nichols Show, one of the things that I've focused on doing, and this has been through my political journey as well, is trying to create value, right? And as a sales guy by trade, one of the things you're always trying to do is be a problem solver, but at the same point in time trying to create value in solving said problem. So with Chris Spangle starting We Are Libertarians in 2012, it's gone through many different iterations, and as it's grown, it's opened up the opportunities for other shows like the show I have at the Brian Nichols Show. And for the past 3 years, one of the main things I've been doing is been having folks on the show to really have conversations about the issues people care about. And this is one of the things I think a lot of libertarians, or just folks in the greater liberty movement, have not really paid attention to. It's talking to normal people and talking about things that people are actually having conversations with at the dinner table, right? I think too often libertarians have entered into conversations talking about what we think people care about instead of asking them. And here's the best part about when you ask someone,
or what we want, we insist that they care about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we'll tell them until we're blue in the face how much they should care about the project that we think they should care about. But when we actually ask them, what do you care about? They're going to tell us. And I think part of the problem is that too often libertarians we think we already know what they need to know. So with my show, I've been asking people in my audience, what do you guys want? And they've been wanting to know, how do we sell the ideas or concepts of liberty to people outside of our movement? And at the end of the day, that's kind of why I've taken my show and turned it the way I have more recently, is because at the end of the day, everything in life is sales. And this is something we have to get past from not just the liberty movement, but just as a society in general. There's this misconception when we talk about sales. People think you're a used car salesman, or they'll think like snake oil salesman. But at the end of the day, truly, salespeople are problem solvers. So if we're able to, as folks in the liberty movement, enter into conversations that people are already having in their mind, again, those bed bug problems that people have that they need help solving, and we're able to build trust, help solve those problems, we are instantly their trusted advisors. And once we're their trusted advisors, now they're going to come to us and ask us on maybe some stuff that they're a little weary on. Like, hey, Brian, I know you were kind of right about that whole lockdown thing, but talk to me now about like student loans. And then I can point them towards somebody like Brad Palumbo, who's been doing great work on student loans. And they might take what I'm saying now a little bit more consideration versus otherwise. So I can tell them all day long what they need to hear, but until we're able to ask questions, learn from them, and actually know what folks are really concerned about, then we're just falling on deaf ears.
So you are actually a salesman in your day job?
Yes, sales executive. So I lead a sales team in telecom. I have a sales team. Our job really is to go out and find qualified opportunities for my company in telecom. So we're looking voice, data, cybersecurity, business continuity, and having conversations with IT directors, CIOs, folks like that. And part of kind of my doing that, I realized that this is just take this and apply this model to liberty. Like I think we see too often folks trying to constantly reinvent the wheel. Mm-hmm. You don't need to do that. Like, the wheel's already there. It's how do we make it work better? And in this case, the liberty movement, we've just been ignoring that sales. We already have like what works in sales, but we need to apply it to what we're doing in the liberty movement and what you've been doing at Free the People, telling stories, having conversations. That's, I think, what people are looking for when they're trying to actually engage in these conversations is like, is it going to be something that's got value to it? Is it something that we can get past like the bumper sticker slogans or the quick 3-minute soundbite on CNN? And they're looking for this, 30-minute, hour, Joe Rogan, 3.5 hour in some cases conversation, because I think people are at the point now that they don't want to hear the screaming heads, the debates. They want to have these long, thought out conversations and really dig into these issues, because I think we're starting to realize that constantly having this like hyper partisan, tribal approach to politics and to governance, it's destructive. And it's leading people to resent their neighbor. And I've been getting more and more folks, and I'm not sure what you guys have been experiencing here for the people and at Kibbe on Liberty, but like, I've had people reaching out to me like, can we have more of these conversations? Like, can we have people that you disagree with on the show? Because I want to hear how a real conversation, like a real dialogue happens. And too often than not, I mean, you watch a quick 5-minute segment on CNN and you're going to see Team Red versus Team Blue screaming at each other for 5 minutes. And if you're a member of the audience, what are you walking away from as a value that you can then bring forward from that segment? Nothing, probably.
Yeah, young people don't go there.
No.
It's you get a little bit dumber every time you watch one of those debates. And unfortunately, in our business, you and I probably have to consume some of that content just so that we know what Fox and MSNBC and whatever the Screamfest of the day is. This reminds me of Penn Jillette was on the show last year, pre-lockdown, so because we were actually in Las Vegas, and he sort of scolded me because I asked him the question, like, how do we convince people that liberty is a better answer to all these problems? And he's like, that's your problem. Your job is not to convince people. Mm. And his point was he takes a very passive approach selling liberty, and he would object to that phrase actually, but he's wanting people to figure it out for themselves, and I think one of the reasons why a 3-hour Joe Rogan Jab Fest is so compelling is that Rogan, he has opinions, but he doesn't really jam his opinions down people's throats. He just asks questions.
Right.
It's like, really? Is that really?
Yeah, well, that's what you have to do. You have to ask those questions, because if you go in, and we see this too often than not with libertarian politicians, and I'm going to pick on the Libertarian Party, not because they're fun to pick on, but because that's the group I care, the most about in actually enacting policy. Because I think, we look at the end of the day, I'd say libertarian ideas and principles, we can agree, that they probably are going to be the best to actually solve the problems we have, right? So when I look at some libertarian candidates, I get a little frustrated because we have a harder job already because we're outside of the mainstream. Right now, your average person, they see red team, blue team. And they might see a gold team every now and then, but that's like once in a while, probably in their local elections. And then every 4 years
it's like 3 days before the election when they're so desperate. They just watched the debate where the Libertarian was explicitly kept off the stage, and they start Googling
who was the other person.
Yeah.
and like, we shouldn't make it harder on ourselves, being the party that's already having to face an uphill battle by approaching messaging from a completely alien perspective. We have to be able, and I mentioned this earlier, we have to be able to enter into the conversations that people are already having in their own minds. And I teach this to my sales team when we're talking about IT directors or CIOs when we're calling in. I'm like, if you were to call in and you were to tell the person how wrong they were, or how stupid they were for picking the thing they did before, you're gonna get instantly hung up on. And that's what's been happening too often to folks in the liberty movement, where we tell people exactly what's wrong, but we do a very woeful job in actually explaining our solutions. So what I would love to see
if they don't get it, we just raise our voice.
Exactly. If we get louder.
As if they're deaf.
Yes, because if we get louder, they'll definitely hear us. And that's the part I think we have to get away from. We have to get away from lecturing and preaching, and be more so, again, your trusted advisor, the person that they are going to pick up the phone call and ask a question to, because they're like, hey, listen, I know that you're right on X, Y, and Z. Help me on this, because this issue, I can't see the answer from the red team or the blue team. Help me out. And that's where we have to do a better job, but we're not putting ourselves in the position that we're even getting that phone call.
Yeah.
Right?
How much is, I assume in sales, because I know this when it comes to nonprofit fundraising, 80% of the process is listening and actually trying to understand where the customer's coming from. Mm-hmm. Is that true in your world?
Absolutely, but also asking questions to uncover those problems. Too often you'll see, you'll have a salesperson on the phone with somebody, and if you're asking a question and the second word is you, the answer to the question is probably a yes or no. And as soon as you're getting a yes or no answer, you've done something wrong. We need to be able to ask open-ended questions to allow people to tell a story. I mean, I like to use the analogy, think if you're looking at a court case, right? And you have your prosecution and your defense. The defense, your job of the defense is to ask the open-ended questions, get the story told. Whereas if you're the prosecution, you're trying to get them cornered for the yes, no, you finally got the nail right there, nail in the coffin, you caught them on the lie. That's what you're trying to do in the prosecution. But from the defense, if you're getting them to tell the story, you have to ask those open-ended questions. Otherwise, objection, you're leading the witness. So I'll joke with my sales team every now and then, I'll drive them crazy. I'll be like, you're leading the witness, because you need to be able to ask those questions, because if you're already approaching the conversation from the mindset of, I think this is your problem, you're going to lead with that yes or no. It's like, hey, Matt, is X your problem? Yes. No. Great. If you say no, well, now what? Versus, Matt, tell me what's up. What's been the number one thing the past 5 months that's really been the number one issue that stopped you from being the best version of yourself, from seeing your company hit whatever metrics you're looking for success, or if you're maybe a mom and pop, from actually keeping your doors open, right? And then once we're able to learn, we can say, hey, listen, yeah, I completely empathize. And here's the problem. Red team, blue teams, they're not going to help you out. They're not going to offer you solutions to answer the problems. However, we do have alternatives out there. And in the marketplace, we're always looking for alternatives, right? Because competition breeds not only innovation, but also will help lower costs and increase those services. And right now, the libertarians, we've done a bad job in trying to present ourselves as a viable, that's the key right there, right? A viable third party.
And you're of course talking about big L libertarianism,
Big L,
as
yeah.
opposed to philosophical libertarianism, which can find its, I think, across the
Absolutely.
political spectrum. But how long? You haven't always been a libertarian, big L.
I know, yeah. It's been a little bit of a journey.
How long?
So I guess I officially became Big L 2018. I signed up for my membership. Got my official LP card, but I've been questioning my I guess I was a former recovering Republican, right? And I've been questioning my political self for quite a while now. I remember the first real seed of doubt, much like I'd say everybody else here, was Ron Paul 2008 during the debate against Giuliani, and I was like, that's different. That's not a normal Republican talking point.
We usually light a candle every time we mention.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have, you can see it from space at this point. But other than that, believe it or not, it was actually in 2012, not with Ron Paul, surprisingly, but it was actually with Mitt Romney when he lost. Because I was the president of the Republican GOP and college Republicans, and I was like, what happened? Because I thought he was talking all the right things. And I kind of came to this realization. I was like, we need to have a fiscally conservative but socially accepting, that was my mindset, Republican Party. And as I started to do the Google searches or the DuckDuckGos of what that would be, I kept on coming back to these libertarian thinkers like Ron Paul and then Milton Friedman and you go down the rabbit hole, right? You go Hayek, Rothbard, and then all of a sudden I'm on a YouTube page and I've been watching videos for about 4 hours. And I found myself realizing that I wasn't actually this big R Republican, but more so a little L libertarian. And believe it or not, I was actually reading this one book called Don't Hurt People, Don't Take Their Stuff, a libertarian manifesto that really kind of planted the seed for sure that I was a libertarian.
I hear that's a good book.
It's actually a really good book. I read it again recently. A guy named Matt Kibbe wrote it. It's actually a really good read. Pretty quick page.
By the way, it actually stole it from Santa Claus.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, Santa Claus...
I don't know if that's bad, but
No, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, because Santa Claus, so I've heard the argument he's a socialist, but I don't know if that's real.
Nah, he's an anarcho-capitalist for sure.
Oh, for sure, absolutely, yeah. Have you watched Klaus yet, by the way, on Netflix that came out?
Which one is that? I've been binge watching Christmas.
So Klaus, I think it came out last year. It's the one with the mailman, and he's put to the North Pole.
No,
it's a good
one. I
one.
watched the new Mel Gibson one, which I thought was spectacular. Fat Man.
Oh, so I haven't seen that one yet. Okay.
It's kind of a Quentin Tarantino version of Santa Claus.
So lots of blood and guts?
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay.
Well, why not?
Santa Claus and blood and guts. Can't beat that.
Anyway, Claus.
Yeah, I was going to say, so Claus, the movie, it's just one of those really, I was going to say, it's a genuinely feel-good movie, but no, it's one of those shows, it does that, I think, approach trying to go after capitalism at one point, but it kind of reels itself back in. But overall, just definitely a good movie to watch.
Yeah,
worth the season.
We can't give up Santa Claus.
No.
I mean, we gave up everything else. Like Santa Claus is where I draw a line in the sand.
Keep Santa.
So the you switched to Libertarian Party, and this debate goes on every day. I watch libertarians love to fight about absolutely everything.
Yes.
But the purpose of the Libertarian Party, and I'll tell you what I think it is, and I sort of learned this from Ron Paul, and he actually did it as a Republican, not a Libertarian, but politics for me, at least anymore, is not really about policy change. It's about using a cultural platform to talk about ideas when people are paying attention. And presidential debates, and Ron Paul taking on Rudy Giuliani, that was a moment where he just turned on so many people because they were paying attention. And otherwise, who's going to tune in to a 3-hour conversation about globalism and foreign policy? Right. I hate to use that word because it doesn't. I don't know what it even means, but sort of neoconservative foreign policy and why we're still in Afghanistan after a lifetime. But that, to me, is one version of the Libertarian Party. There's another version that says we need to win elections so that we can actually implement policy. And there's there's a few that have sort of broken through that ceiling, but not that many. Where are you on this spectrum of we have to win or we have to use it as a cultural platform?
So I think we can do both. And I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but I do look at the Libertarian Party as a vessel, right? When you look at the LP, I think right now the LP's role is to serve, number one, as a foil to the red team, blue team, but also to give people a true alternative which will hold those other two parties accountable. Now, we're seeing this right now in Georgia as we're recording. A friend of my program, Shane Hazel, he was a U.S. Senate candidate out in Georgia as a libertarian, and he forced, I think it's the Purdue election, to go to a runoff. And Shane, as a libertarian, got, I forget how, I think it's 140 some odd thousand votes. And like those 140,000 votes, those people made a conscious decision to vote for a different party because those two traditional parties weren't meeting the bill. And that's something that it can't be understated. The LP is playing a role. However, there is a role for little L libertarians, and I say that being the folks, the Republicans out there who self-identify as libertarians, or heck, even some of the Democrats who are more, empathetic with some libertarian-leaning ideas. There is absolutely not only a role, but it's I would say it's required for us to even have some credibility, because we can refer to those people and those wins and show the value of, to your point, the policy and how it impacts real people's lives when we're making those appeals to more of like the culture, right? So, for example, if we were to look at, let's say Justin Amash, right? The one big L libertarian that there is in Congress right now. Justin voting for the marijuana legalization. Justin leading the charge on ending qualified immunity. Without Justin being there as that role as the big L, then I don't know if we're going to have as much as a voice. Take it to the Republican Party. You have someone like Thomas Massie, who really, he forced people in Congress to come to the White House or to the Capitol building to cast a vote on the biggest increase in our debt in ever, right? And that's something that I think we need to make sure we're encouraging people to acknowledge, because without Thomas Massie, we may have had this entire bill that was voted for, the spending bill during the coronavirus, without anybody's name attached to it, which, I mean, that also would have been horrifying. So I would say there is a very important role for both the big L libertarians and the little L libertarians. And I guess I'll finish with this. I want to see a more lively, active libertarian party from a local perspective. I think, and this is just in general, we need to start pushing things locally, going back towards like this federalist approach to governance, because I think the most winning argument right now, and this is being really exemplified with the pandemic and the lockdowns especially, is that whatever governments are at least able to govern the most local, the better. Because then you're not having to worry about, California setting the lockdown policy for Texas or Florida or Michigan or New York. But vice versa, now we're not having, California terrified that they're going to have to do all the open business that Florida's doing. So there is this very important yin and yang, if you will, but it's entirely necessary with a federalist approach. And I think right now that's where libertarians need to be focusing this libertarian federalist message, because that's where I think people are going to be able to really gravitate, whether they're progressive, conservative, or somewhere in between.
So should we, one of the big debates in the Libertarian Party right now is, are we more likely to connect with conservatives, disaffected Republicans that look at $24 trillion in debt and a radical expansion of sort of the power of the presidency under Republicans, Trump and Bush in recent memory, just radical expansion of presidential power.
Yep.
And, of course, Barack Obama after Bush and Joe Biden after Trump will say, okay, I got it.
Yep.
I'm running with it. So, there's lots of reasons to be a disaffected Republican.
Absolutely.
But I still think that there's tremendous opportunities, not to talk so much to progressive politicians, but to talk to young people who think that AOC is cooler than Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. We should be talking to those
Absolutely.
kids.
Oh my God, we're dropping the ball if we're not. And I was just actually talking about this with I think it was with Brad. I grabbed coffee with Brad beforehand, and it's like when you look at AOC, what is she doing? She's having, these Twitch conversations and stuff with hundreds of thousands of people. And it's like, who's the Republican version of this? Who's the Libertarian version of this? And I mean, we can go to Thomas Massey, kind of, I guess. Justin Amash, kind of. But are they playing Twitch with hundreds of thousands of users? No. So there is a really big opening for us to have those cultural conversations. But I don't know if we're going to necessarily have the most success using the GOP. And I say that because, to your point, there is a really big negative perception from a vast majority of Americans when you instantly mention the GOP or the red team, and vice versa. I mean, you tell anybody in a rural red area that you're a Democrat, and I'm sure they're going to look at you like you have 5 heads. So there is kind of this again, going back to the yin and yang between these two different camps. So I think looking at the libertarians, be they big L or little l, we have to kind of go into, if you're going to go to the big L camp, be the candidate. Like, try to be as open and trying to promote whatever it is that bedbug issue is for your specific locality, right? So if lockdowns are the biggest thing impacting your area, you go after lockdowns. If the war on drugs is the biggest issue, you go after the war on drugs. Civil asset forfeiture, yada, yada, yada. But then if you're going to use the GOP or the Democratic Party as a platform and really as a tool to enact whatever it is you're looking to enact, whether it's trying to catch people's attention like Ron Paul, get policy into an action like Rand Paul's doing, I don't care, right? At the end of the day, just decide what you're going to do and then use that party to enact that. So you look at somebody like Rand Paul. Rand Paul is using the Republican Party to reach people that otherwise he would just absolutely not be able to reach to if he had an L next to his name. That's just a fact. Like, you can't just look at Rand Paul and be like, oh yeah, he would have just as much success. It's like, no, he wouldn't. But to the same point, right? We look at folks like Gary Johnson, and Gary Johnson went from being an R to getting the L next to his name, and instantly just drops in the support. And that's because Americans don't trust us yet. Why do Americans not trust libertarians? Because we haven't really given them a reason to. We've been able to talk a good game, but we haven't been able to show value, especially in those local elections. So to kind of take this and put a nice bow on it, what I would say is, libertarians out there, if you are looking to run for office, I would 1,000% encourage you, run local. Like, local is the best means to start building up that resume. Because for better or for worse, Americans are looking for the resume. They want to know, okay, were you dog catcher to city council to mayor, mayor to assembly, and now assembly to Congress, and then you can use that to actually say...
That's sort of the Thomas Massey roadmap.
Bingo. Yeah, exactly. And like that's kind of necessary for your average person to feel comfortable, like, okay, when I cast my vote for you, it's more than just casting a vote. You're kind of trusting that person to do what they say they're going to do. And that's where we have a responsibility to, like, be that candidate. Like, say, like, hey, listen, the lockdowns are our issue, and we're going to take care of it if you elect us into local office. And if you get elected into local office as a libertarian, you better make sure that you go out and you follow through. And then once you follow through, you build that trust. Then, as you run for whatever that office is in the future, they're going to give us a little bit more credence. They're going to listen to us a little bit more seriously. And that's, candidly, Matt, that's why people haven't really paid attention to us, because we haven't given them a really substantive reason to give us any attention.
It strikes me that the localism argument, I mean, this is like get to a libertarian values sort of based argument, and we believe in local solutions. We believe in people voluntarily getting together and solving problems, and that should be our strength. It could be a liability, because that's very different than making an empty promise like, I'm going to lock down everything until COVID. I think
until nothing bad happens ever again.
I think the governor of California actually said until nobody dies. That's a
wow, lofty goal.
0 deaths in society. I don't know where that is, but it's not this world. But, it sounds really good.
It's the Galactic Federation we heard about.
I will never die if I vote for this guy. But localism in all of its complexity is really hard to put in a tweet.
Yep.
We're going to figure this out. And that's what it comes down to. But the genius of the American model is that thing. But it's more of a lifestyle than it is a policy solution. Yeah. Because you're basically saying, I'm going to respect people enough to not decide to herd all of my recovering senior citizens into nursing homes.
Yeah.
That seemed like an obviously bad decision, but there are all sorts of good-sounding decisions that turn out to be tragic as well. It's it's difficult to do that. And so when I see libertarians sort of fighting about, like, do we talk to Republicans? Do we talk to Democrats? I mean, I think we talk to everybody,
Yes.
but it's more about what you're saying, like,
and who you're saying it to.
yeah, and less about these sound like very top-down strategies to me, and our whole point is that we're the bottom-up guys.
Right. Yeah. And it requires us to be different and to also, and this is one thing I always I drive my sales teams nuts with, but like you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So like if you're going out and you're talking to Democrats and you're like, geez, this is tough. Good. That means that you need to get better in that certain area and feel challenged, because at what you're doing when you're talking to that group of people is you're making them feel uncomfortable. So you have to be comfortable in what it is that you're promoting, but also understand that while you're doing that, you're putting people in a very vulnerable position, right? You're kind of making them reconsider their entire worldview, and that's a really big deal. So when you realize, like, I gotcha, like when you kind of get them in that like cognitive dissonance trap, don't call them on it. You just gotta take a step back, because I mean, I know we want the instant. It's like, I gotcha, and you want to do that Jordan Peterson, like, ha, gotcha, when he was interviewing Kathy Newman, but you can't. You have to be able to let them kind of like realize that on their own, at their own time, because really, and it's a silly analogy, but we have to be like gardeners of liberty. Plant the seeds. We have to make sure that we're going out there and we're casting a wide net, but at the same point in time, it's not going to grow overnight. So we have to take our time, plant as many seeds as we can of liberty, and slowly watch them as they grow. And like look for the areas that we are having success. So on the left, I think we're having a lot of success talking about the war on drugs, criminal justice reform. I mean, you can go down, you start talking about ending, the overseas wars. I think there is a conversation to be had in the left. On the right, lockdowns are absolutely the number one thing that the GOP has been going towards, and I would say it's to the LP's detriment. We haven't taken up that argument, but right now, lockdowns, lead with that. Lead with taxes. Lead with
the LP's split down the middle on lockdowns.
The LP's been split in the middle of messaging about lockdowns, I would say. Like, we have not been able to have a cohesive, here's what our statement is, without some wishy-washy, backhanded, like, but also make sure you're taking into consideration your fellow Americans. Like, yes, that goes without saying, but can we just boldly say, without a question, that the lockdowns are inhumane and they're like causing long-term devastation to hundreds of millions of Americans? Like, this should not be controversial, and we shouldn't apologize for saying it. Like, it's blatantly true, but we still find ourselves trying to play footsie with folks who they don't really care about. And to your point, right? We started this conversation up with some of the mayors and the governors. They don't care. Like, they're just trying to create this perception of control and order, because once we start to accept maybe this isn't exactly controlled and orderly like we thought, then the entire system starts to get these little red flags popping up everywhere. And once people start to really ask questions, then there's going to have to be some answers. And if there's no answers to be had, then I would say the electorate's going to get a little antsy, even more so than they have been for being under lockdown for 10 months now?
Yeah, there's no exit strategy to lockdowns, because you have to, first of all, we never get to 0 deaths.
Right.
Tragically,
Yep.
We live in a world where people die.
Weird,
but
that happens.
To get out of lockdowns, you would need the humility of lockdowners saying, you know what, that didn't work. Let's try something else. And politics can't do that. But yeah, that's it. My sense is that lockdowns and the human devastation caused by lockdowns probably are the window to have this conversation. And it doesn't have to be. It's such a partisan issue, oddly, but I don't think it has to be, because we have to shed light on who gets hurt. I mean, we have let's go full Marx. There's haves and have-nots.
Yes.
When lockdowns.
There's essential and non-essential.
Yeah. There's essential and non-essential. There's, like, if you're of a certain profession and a certain income, you're probably not feeling the lockdown right now.
Yep.
Honestly, in my business, I'm fine.
I'm in telecom.
I'm
People
fine.
need what my company is selling more than ever. Like, this is how you stay connected. But then I know that there are bartenders out there who are literally just struggling to make a rent payment. And, like, that's the people that we should be talking to. Like, and this is the part, too. Like, they are so open to this argument right now because they're living through the real pain. But I would say we're leading with the things that aren't mattering to them on the top of their head. Like if we're going to go in and we're starting to talk about, name fringe issue here that it's really important to us, like, okay, great. I'll listen to that, when I'm not trying to make sure I can put food on the table for my kids. We have to prioritize and they'll really rank what is it that is going to catch people's attention. We have to pique their interest. And then, and this is the part too that I think a lot of libertarians, it drives me crazy. They try to be, the master, the skill, something of many, but master of none. That's kind of like your average libertarian. We see your average libertarian, they'll try to be the salesperson, the educator, the recruiter, and you can't necessarily do all of it at once. We have to appreciate that certain people in our movement can do certain things well. So I had Larry Sharp on my show. Larry Sharp ran for governor in 2018 in New York. Love Larry. And Larry's like, Brian, I'm the recruiter. I'm going to bring in as many libertarians as I can to the movement. And you know what? When they come into the movement, I need you to tell people in the LP that they're not libertarian because I need you to train them. I need you to help educate them on what it means to be a libertarian. I can get them in and get them interested in liberty, but I need you guys to help craft them into libertarians. And it's also where we've been dropping the ball a lot. We see, vote totals. And vote totals are one thing to look at, 4 million down to a million or so from the libertarian presidential candidate. I'm more concerned, though, with the membership that's stuck around. And we haven't really seen membership stick around. So my question is to the LP, what are we going to do to build up that base of long-term, lasting member? Because in business, who you go after? You don't always spend your time going after new customers. You make sure, number one, that your returning customers are happy. And we haven't really focused on trying to get, number one, to get those customers to stick around, but number two, to stick around for the long haul. That's the main thing that we've really been dropping the ball on. So I guess I'll ask you, Matt, what are your thoughts? Do you think, and this is the host in me coming out, do you think telling stories is going to be the way that we're going to be able to captivate a lot of these people like you guys have been doing it for the people? Or do you think we need to be more, going out, talking to people face to face? And I had Cliff Maloney on my show and he gave me a stat and it blew me away. So he has Young Americans for Liberty guys and girls who go out and knock on doors. 1 out of every 9 door that they knock on, they can get a vote from. So it's working. So why aren't we doing it? So I guess what do you have any opinion there on that?
Well, it's like different things for different people, and I think the Larry Sharps of the world to me are probably the most interesting aspect of libertarianism because having been a former grassroots organizer, what we're trying to do is very different.
Right.
Like we're not building a cadre of people that read all the same books I did. We could do that. That's sort of what the Libertarian Party is now, and that's fine. But the goal here is to have a communication strategy that turns a bunch of young people on to this idea. They're just we call them liberty curious.
Right.
And that's very different than being libertarian. It's having a sensibility that says, you know what, maybe if the government wasn't so involved in that, things would work out better. And just having that sort of aha moment. And I was actually, you remind me of an event I did with Larry Sharp where we were talking about this very question. And it struck me that, and this goes sort of back to what Penn Jillette was saying, are we recruiting people to the party or are we building a community that's actually big enough to tolerate lots of disagreements, particularly as you're learning and evolving and thinking things through. And it strikes me that if our goal is to convince a majority of Americans to be big L libertarians and to be able to quote Rothbard, no offense, Logan, I know you're a fan, but that's not it. It can be very sloppy, messy coalitions on war, like Ron Paul created. A lot of Ron Paul supporters came from the left because of that issue. On criminal justice that cuts, it's very attractive to evangelicals on the one hand and progressives on the other that want to defund the police. I think all of that is fine. And I'm reminded, and I've told this story before, but there's this awesome New York Times article where all of Bernie's old socialist pals in Burlington are talking shit about him because he's not nearly socialist enough. And great? He's been such a failure for the socialist movement. And I'm thinking, dude, he just got the entire Democratic Party on board.
Right.
and now has all of these acolytes like AOC, and there's some more that came in this last class. And that sort of bitching and whining about how he's not pure enough reminds me of any sort of ideological movement.
Yep.
You have the purists, and I'm kind of one of those guys myself, but I'm also a grassroots organizer, and if purity is your only goal, you're going to be small.
Yep.
And we're going through tremendous growing pains now.
Yeah. Well, I always say, do you want to be the king of being right, or do you actually want to get people to be more free?
So you can. I don't think you have to choose. I'm agreeing with you on this. I don't think we have to choose, but we at least have to be welcoming to people that don't agree with us 100%.
Yes.
So when Tulsi Gabbard is good on war,
Exactly.
she's not good on everything.
No.
We all know this. I mean, she's at least a former Bernie bro. I don't know if she still is, and she's probably evolving in her thinking as well. But I think it's really interesting that she's a Democrat. The authoritarian progressives
can't stand her.
hate her guts. Yeah. Like, we should have conversations with her, not so much that she, who has a fully developed set of views, is going to change, but all of her young fans, they're searching, they're curious.
I had a guy in my show. So, man, I'm so glad you brought this up. I had a guy in my show. He was running for New York State Assembly in 2018, and he was running as a self-avowed Democratic Socialist. And so I did an entire show, and it was called Ask a Democratic Socialist. And with that show, I knew that I was never going to change his mind. I didn't want to change his mind, but I knew for a fact that he was going to share that show. And there was going to be folks that were his followers that were listening, and this was the first time that they were ever going to hear a libertarian perspective. And that for me, just for them to hear a different perspective versus they probably have been in their echo chambers for years and they haven't heard any other ideas besides democratic socialism, like that right there, that for me was more value than, trying to convince him that free market economics is better than democratic socialism, because at the end of the day, he's not going to change his mind. But if I just planted that seed in like 5 people's minds that were his followers, I think I've done my job for that day.
Yeah, and that to me is a really interesting opportunity and something that we worry about a lot at Free the People. We have our next video coming out is called "Let's Talk About Democratic Socialism," and it's a new series we've done where I spent a lot of time listening to what democratic socialists think they're saying when they talk about democratic socialism, as opposed to my knee-jerk reaction, well, that's a contradiction in terms.
Mm-hmm.
Like, socialism is top-down. Democratic, in the best sense, is bottom-up.
Right.
And I happen to be pro-democracy, by the way, and that upsets some libertarians. But my version of democracy is where people make choices, and it's not the vulgar 51% of the public gets to do whatever the hell they want to the other 49% who lost.
Right.
That's a very dangerous idea. But democratic might mean your ability to listen to Taylor Swift if you really need to. God help your soul. Whereas I'm gonna be streaming dead shows from the 70s, and somehow or another we're both better off.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a thing. But I wanted to understand, and there's a huge literature on democratic socialism. They've been arguing even before Marx about what they mean by this. And Marx came in with a very authoritarian version, a very dangerous version, obviously, that kind of stamped everything out. But the whole purpose of that exercise is to talk to young people who are probably more attracted to the word democratic than socialist. Mm-hmm. And they're hoping that it means, and AOC at her best actually describes a very bottom-up process of communities cooperating and solving problems. Well, of course, you and I know that socialism every single time,
always the best of intentions,
43, 45 times we've tried this, it never turns out that way. Even in places like Venezuela, which were legitimately democratic, socialist, but then they just naturally devolved into a brutal authoritarian regime. Yeah. So I think there's an opportunity, but it kind of goes back to where we started. Are we listening to the people who disagree with us enough to sort of respect them? Do you respect that they're actually trying to figure out how the world works as well? And sure, there are disingenuous and even evil people promoting ideas across the political spectrum, but when it comes to our fellow Americans, they're They're just trying to figure stuff out.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us as small L, big L libertarians, or just lovers of liberty, to remember that not everybody is ever going to 100% agree with us, and that's okay. I don't think I want 100% of people to agree with me. That'd be a little weird. And I'm not sure. Are you a fan of The Mandalorian by chance?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so I just watched the gallery. It was called is a round table of all the directors. And Jon Favreau, who is the creative director for the Mandalorian, he brought in I think it's 6 or 7 different directors, and you have Taika Waititi, you have Dave Filoni, Deborah Chow, Bryce Dallas Howard, a few other, and then to go through and listen to each of these people at the table. They have completely different ideas of how to film a Star Wars show. But they brought all of them together at the table because with all their different perspectives, they were able to create, in my opinion, the best Star Wars content that we've seen since, the original trilogy, probably? And for me, that shows that what the answer is going to be going forward is not just libertarians, just socialists, just progressives, just Republicans, just Democrats. It's going to be a society where we all have different perspectives in our different localities, and we're allowed to live free. And you're allowed to live your life so long as you don't hurt people, you don't take their stuff.
I feel like we should end right there.
How about that?
Well, let's end with you telling us where we subscribe to the Brian Nichols Show and just what you got coming up.
For sure. So, as you aptly said, the Brian Nichols Show, it can be found briannicholsshow.com. Doing 3 shows a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And really the goal of my program not only is to show folks how to approach these issues from a solutions-based perspective, but also we're trying to have conversations with people about the issues that people genuinely care about, because I want my audience to walk away from every episode feeling they were educated, enlightened, and informed. And if I'm able to have my audience leave each episode feeling like that, I know I've done my part to help at least get somebody in a better position to maybe wake somebody up. That's going to be, I think, the main thing is we need to be really the alarm clocks of liberty. Get folks out there interested in what we have to say, and we have to make liberty sexy. Stop trying to hide behind, the dogma, and get out there. Show the value of what it's going to do for people in their real lives. You want to talk about getting people, free, right? Talk about ending the lockdown. It's about getting more money in people's bank accounts because that's not being taken away. That's what we're doing at the Brian Nichols Show. I'm having guests on. I've had CEOs, politicians, I've had C-level executives on my show. I had the chief marketing officer from TigerFitness.com on my show. So really, heck, Matt, you've been on my show multiple times. We have folks from all over. And really, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is have conversations that people are going to be able to actually walk away with and make some real difference in the world.
I want you to land Baby Yoda as a guest.
I would love to do nothing more.
No one's been able to do that.
Grogu.
Yeah.
Little Grogu. We'll get him on here.
Thanks for watching Kibbe on Liberty. By now, you know this is the most important event of your week. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Click the little bell so you get notifications. Kibbe on Liberty, mostly honest conversations with mostly interesting people.